Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Magnetic Marketing Podcast. Today we get to listen to Dan Kennedy as he speaks at a live event. Now, this is really cool. We've heard Dan Kennedy talk about how to identify and find your attractive character. We've talked about ponds that you should be fishing in, what kind of bait you should be using. But this is where we get really specific, and Dan talks about what kind of fish you should really be fishing for. In short, why would you try fishing for sardines and small catches when figuratively you can shoot for whales? Now, we've split this into two parts for you so that way you're able to catch every piece of gold that Dan Kennedy provides. So make sure that as you're taking notes and as you're paying attention, that you make sure to stay tuned for episode number 2. Let's listen in.
I don't think there's anybody that has had a bigger impact in the field of direct response than Dan Kennedy.
The legend of Dan Kennedy should be ignored at your own peril.
They're not really lessons, they're kind of laws that you live by.
Dan opened my eyes to what small business marketing looks like.
Dan teaches strategic direct response that is timeless.
His ripple effect touches people who don't even know his name.
The world as we know it was changed because Dan Kennedy became obsessed with marketing.
Welcome to the Magnetic Marketing Podcast with your host, Dan Kennedy.
Okay, so we shall go to work since we're already starting 7 minutes behind. And we will try and make you some money tonight. I want to talk about being very specific in your search, selection, attraction, and specifically about being that for really high value customers, clients, patients, or donors. For those of you that are a nonprofit, the principles are the same. And so the term whale, if you don't know, is kind of comes from Vegas. It comes from the gambling industry. They talk about hunting for whales. There's a really cool book, by the way, called A Whale Hunt in the Desert. I don't remember the author's name, but it is a book it's nonfiction, it's a book by a very famous casino host, the person in charge of handling whales and recruiting whales for casinos before they all became corporate. There is still whale management, but it's not like it was before they all became corporate. It's a very cool book, just as an aside. So we're going to talk about hunting for, finding, choosing, and attracting whales. And so the first sort of preliminary question to think about is to define what a whale is for you. And that will be a different definition, in some respects at least, than it would be for me. I'm going to share mine just as an example, but it would be a different definition. Even if there's two dentists sitting side by side in the room, they might very well define what a whale is to them differently, because it is not just about the monetary value necessarily of the customer. It is about, is it the kind of customer you want to deal with or not, although monetary value is important. Generally speaking, Vegas's definition is that a whale is someone worth somewhere between 5 times and 50 times their average customer. And they will count them as a whale. They obviously prefer those who are worth 50 times more than worth 5 times more. And part of what many people look for is the multiplier effect. So if you have a choice between two clients and one of them has a great circle of influence and another one does not have a great circle of influence, most people would rather have the one with a great circle of influence. I, for example, am not a great influencer for the people I do business with locally because I hide out at home. So I'm a hermit. My friends and quasi-friends and almost friends and used to be friends are mostly distanced. You know, they're all over the country. So for the local property and casualty insurance guy who has me as a client, I'm a good client, but in this particular category, I'm not very useful to him because I'm not a good source of referrals. And if he was setting out to get somebody, he might very well be better advised to try and get somebody who he could multiply. So the first thing to understand about all this is very few business people ever give this any thought. Most people their approach to customers is anybody they can get. And furthermore, they make no differential adjustments once they get a buyer for the first time in how they're going to weight their resources and their time and their energy in developing those buyers into customers. They don't have 5 questions to ask them to get data to tell them this is a potential whale, this isn't. Gee, I'll spend 10 times more money, energy, and effort turning this one into a really good customer than I will turning this one into a really good customer. So even people that collect data, and collect customer names. So if you go to a really nice restaurant for the first time, and they actually, which will only happen about 1 out of every 5 times, but they actually get your information and they succeed in putting you on a list, however many they got that night will all be on the same list and will all be dealt with exactly the same way. Nobody will now sit down with information they collected about each one of those people or information they might go get about each one of those people and make value judgments of, oh, okay, we got 22 people in here for the first time tonight that we collected information on. Which 4 are the whales? Which 4 are going to be more valuable to us in the future than the other 16? Hardly anybody does that. Hardly anybody bothers to take those customer names and go Google them or go Facebook them and see what you might be able to determine about those customers that would help you find a whale. So there's information readily available now that people don't even use. So the first thing is to start thinking in these terms of there is differential customer value. Not all customers are the same. Some are more valuable to you than others, and it's important for you to have a definition of what makes a really, really, really valuable customer for you. We know, for example, in businesses where we are selling to the parent for use by the child, that automatically a household with 3 kids is more valuable than a household with 1 kid. Right? Because all 3 of them are going to have the same problem, and all 3 of them are going to need the same product at some point during their life cycle. So one of the things we want to know every time we get a new customer is how many kids they got, because we'll spend more money communicating with the ones that got 3 than the ones that got 1, because they're going to be 3 times more valuable. Now again, hardly anybody goes through this process except some really true core direct marketers. So I'll take you through a few examples of whale definition markers, how people in different businesses might mark a whale. For financial advisors, it is often the amount of investable assets they have that is not necessarily predicted by current income, because somebody could have stopped their income earning years but have a great deal of net worth. But it's the amount of investable assets they have, and it's a conservative mentality for most advisors, because most advisors do conservative things with a 55 to 75-year-old person's money. So they want them to have a conservative mentality, which one of the ways that's revealed is they have a paid-off house. All right? And they have a certain amount of investable assets. And the way somebody in the advisory business would use that is they try and engineer their marketing to bring people to them that have a high number of investable assets and have a paid-for house. Somebody selling really weird investments, the exotic stuff, llama farm derivatives. That's not his customer at all. So a marker for him is somebody who's already playing with some sort of speculative stuff. And so I would take him, for example, so the Kentucky Derby occurs tomorrow, I would take him and I would run his lead generation ad in Thoroughbred Times, the trade journal for people that own racehorses, which is like the world's worst investment. Pretty much everybody invested in it knows it's the world's worst investment. Everybody is hoping against hope, against hope, against hope, against hope that one of the nags they buy is going to be in that race tomorrow, and they're willing to pee away an enormous amount of money to try and make that happen. If we're selling llama farm derivatives, that's our guy. Dad, who worked at the same company for 44 years and lived way beneath his means and saved all his money and paid off his house, he's not the guy to try and sell llama farm derivatives to. So there's behavioral markers that tell us things. So if we're a chiropractor, who might be our whale? Our whale would be somebody with a severe chronic condition. A whale is unlikely to be somebody who just fell off a ladder and hurt themselves this weekend and is pretty much going to get that taken care of in a relatively short period of time. Our whale's going to be somebody with chronic and severe issues, has a lot of affluence or top insurance, and ideally shows some open-mindedness to non-medical care, which we might get to by what magazines he subscribes to. Has he bought herbs by mail? Something like that. If we're selling Aspen condo vacation homes, we might look for subscribers to the high-end Colorado magazine, and it's going to a non-Colorado address. Right? We might look for that. We want them to have home ownership somewhere else, because a buyer of something is a buyer of something is a buyer of something. We don't want them to be a renter. The interior decorator, a marker would be recent purchase of a high-priced home, because they can't wait to rip something apart and replace it. And they subscribe to high-end magazines, Architectural Digest, and so forth. So whatever business you're in, if you think it through, there are markers of likely whales that are data-driven, they're behavioral, they're not necessarily demographic, they're behavioral, and in many cases, once you figure that out, there is a access path in order to get it and do target marketing. There's time-sensitive stimulus that affects someone becoming a whale who was not one a month ago and may not be one 6 months from now. And that happens a lot in business. So some big benchmarks are marriage, especially second or third to younger. That will often spark a great deal of spending in a short period of time. If you haven't heard Joan Rivers' First Wife, Second Wife comedy routine, go to YouTube, take a look at it. It's a good lesson in this. Similarly, recent divorce. All right. So divorce often prompts a sudden flow of spending and elevates somebody to whale status who wasn't there before and may not be there 6 months, 12 months from now. We know, for example, in the weight loss business, the cosmetic dentistry business, the cosmetic surgery business, for guys, the hair restoration business, a lot of that, their willingness to spend, their interest in spending, their price sensitivity issues are all altered when they get a divorce, right? So it was okay to be fat, bald, and ugly after 30 years of marriage, but 3 months after the end of the marriage, fat, bald, and ugly don't work so well. So all of a sudden, they're a whale in spending. Home purchase makes somebody a whale. So hitting certain age benchmarks suddenly makes them susceptible to spending on different things and at a different level than they were before. The sale of a business. So often, the millionaire next door type has spent a good part of his life building up a business. He now sells it, and he suddenly, briefly, has more money in cash at one time than he has ever had in his life. So somebody sells a business, all of a sudden they got all this cash, right? And it changes their behavior. They're suddenly a whale. They didn't have cash before. All their net worth was tied up in their business, right? And so Vegas, for example, targets those people, okay? That's a whale for Vegas, possibly. So the sale of a business, retirement, suddenly taking on a new hobby or new recreational pursuit for a brief period of time. Somebody may rise to whale spending status because of that. Diagnosis with a disease, a person who's likely to take proactive response to that suddenly becomes a whale. So you see, if you watch direct response ads on TV, a big direct response advertiser is Cancer Centers of America. Right? And it's a for-profit hospital advertising for a family member or the person who has just been diagnosed with cancer, because to them, that's a whale. Right? And 2 days before the diagnosis, that person was useless to them. So these markers can affect it dramatically. Whale sightings. Here's categories where we find a disproportionate percentage these days. Boomers and seniors. If you've read the No BS Marketing to Boomers and Seniors book, you're familiar with many of the statistics about this. It is the first time, really, that the classic demographic patterns are sort of disrupted. Right? Older are continuing to spend in ways that no prior generation in their age bracket spent, and younger are not spending in the way they're supposed to spend to create replacement spending. And there's been a shift of discretionary spending to 60 and 70-year-olds who are now behaving. 70 is the new 50. We have seen it. I have clients in the skincare business, and we have seen a dramatic shift in the age of the buyer in the past 10 years of skincare and of really expensive skincare. It used to sort of stop right around 60. That was sort of, okay, from here on out, the hell with it. You know, that's sort of, you know, now I have a client who sells, by direct marketing, a $680 home skincare thing. Okay? And the sweet spot of that buyer in 7 years has migrated from 48 to 71. That's how far it has shifted. And you wouldn't think of 71-year-olds, but they are. So boomers and seniors, boomer and senior professionals, a lot of spending there, a lot of whales to be found there for their issues. So I have a client right now in the dental field who's doing very, very well, selling high-priced coaching to dentists about how to retire in practice rather than by sale of the practice. Because even if you sell the practice, right now, what are you going to do with the money? Because there's no conservative place to put the money to get any yield. So you need to learn how to retire but keep your practice and your income source, and he's doing very, very, very well. Late life divorced, big category. It's where the greatest growth is 50 plus. Right? It's no longer, gee, I only got 8 years left before one of us kicks the bucket. It's now I got 38 years left before one of us kicks the bucket, and this is intolerable. So the late life divorced people are suddenly buying houses. They're suddenly buying all the stuff that nobody in their ages used to buy before. Late life second families. So you have a lot of the, I'm going to get it right the second time around, and they spend like whales. Secure affluence with bucket lists. There's a whole, kind of ever since that movie. That movie was sort of an infomercial for spending money late in life before you die. And so that is a category. The frustrated fixed income investor. Affluence involved in high-cost competitive hobbies and recreation. All right? So the $800 putter is a reality. You know, I think it was Charlie who said this morning, a $65 fishing lure, right? Now, and if you're not in one of these categories, you like have no idea unless you go look. Okay, so like that was a piece of news to me, right? I'm thinking fishing lures are like $5 at Walmart. That's what I'm thinking. It never occurred to me somebody spent $75, $65 for a stupid fishing lure. But now there's stuff that I would spend that money on that everybody else would say, what? How can that possibly be? Right? And so there's all these categories. How many of you get or have ever read Cowboys and Indians magazine? Raise your hands. You'll learn more if you look around looking at them than looking at me. Okay, there aren't many hands. You should, if you're interested in marketing to the affluent, you should actually go, you can buy it on a newsstand. So next time you're at a Barnes & Noble, buy one. You will be astounded if you have not paid any attention to this. This is, how many of you know what the Robb Report is? Okay, good. This is the Robb Report on steroids for people who are pretending to be cowboys. That's what this is, okay? And so it's a magazine of home furnishings and apparel and jewelry and boots and specially raised super-duper horses to ride that never do anything wrong, and it's all ungodly expensive. You look at it, you say, I can't even believe people are spending this kind of money on this stuff, but in that subculture category, there's affluent people spending a great deal of money. Second act, entrepreneurs, international travelers, and as I said, the anti-aging youth buyer. Nobody is willing to go quietly into the good night anymore. They are going kicking and screaming and spending money. I know people here who are in the anti-aging, hormone replacement, kind of the Sengenics kind of business. How many of you have noticed the Sengenics ads? Not many, huh? Geez, a lot of you who didn't raise your hand you look like you could use something like it, I gotta tell you. I mean, pretty much everything's sagging, you know what I'm saying? This is a very successful direct response campaign, big ads. It's a licensed doctor in each area delivering a certain kind of anti-aging treatment. This is a very big category of spending right now in which there are a lot of whales. So you got to think through in your business category, in your business, who might be the whales, what might be a whale for you, what criteria you want to establish for the whale you want to now deliberately go get. Just as example, I'll tell you mine. So clients, not GKIC members now, but clients, okay, I need somebody who will invest upwards from $75,000 on a project. And that rules out a whole lot of people. Not just because, as Barbara accused me of, they're cheapskates. It's the size and scope of their opportunity doesn't warrant spending that kind of money. Doesn't mean they're wrong at all, just means they're wrong for me. Right? They might be a great client for somebody else, they're just not a good client for me, which gets to they have a sufficient size and scope and growth potential of their opportunity, so one way or another, they can give me the compensation I want, and there's a likelihood of year to year to year to year continuation of a relationship. They have to be reasonably intelligent and capable. Okay? So the number one way that freelance copywriters don't get their royalties is the client can't implement the work after they get it. The number two way freelance copywriters don't get their royalties is the client can't implement. The number three way that freelance copywriters don't get their royalties is the client can't. So they have to be relatively intelligent and capable, or to me, they're not particularly valuable because I don't just get money on the front, I get money on the back. They have to be respectful, well-behaved, and low maintenance. Right? Now for somebody else again, but not for me. So a high-maintenance client's no good for me. So they have to evidence that they can be trained to be high maintenance with everybody else if they want to, but be low maintenance with Dan, or that's not going to work. They have to be a leader or a leader in the making in a field, so they're useful to me in catching another whale. I don't need a multiplier effect anymore, but I'd like to have a duplication effect. I'd like the probability that one will give me another one. Now, customers, so if you now think more of folks that are sitting here in the room, a whale for us is somebody who in their lifetime with us can and will spend $100,000 or more. We jokingly call it the $100,000 Club. Dustin Matthews has asked that we come up with a pin. and he's right, by the way. But we have quite a few people who have spent $100,000 and more during the time they have been with us. And there are behavioral characteristics of those people. They own and operate one or more businesses that are good vehicles to apply our methods to. So the person who dreams of being in business but isn't in business, not a good customer for us. Might be a good customer for somebody else, not a good customer for us. The person who confuses a website with a business, not a good customer for us. Maybe a good customer for somebody else, not a good customer for us. Preferably, they're an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur in the making. So business people divide into three categories. There's the be your own boss person. Again, nothing wrong with them. They're just not really valuable to us. Be your own boss person is somebody who wants to do what they were doing when they had a boss and keep doing it without the boss. Car mechanic opens an auto repair shop, not because he's an entrepreneur. He just wants to fix cars and not have somebody telling him what to do. That's the level of his ambition. Okay? The small business owner, slightly higher level of ambition, but still pretty much restricted. And often what we do, what you're a part of, sort of just annoys them. Okay? It just bothers them. So the entrepreneur is best for us. High income professionals, very good for us. Okay? Study ethic and work ethic. Okay? For us, if they won't read, if they won't listen, if they won't watch, and they won't work, they're not going to be a whale for us. And they aren't really going to be around very long either. So knowing this, then, you start to make a lot of strategic and tactical decisions about how you weight the way you spend your resources, where you go to get customers, what you say to attract customers, so that you attract more whales than you attract anything else. So there's three basic ways to get whales. One is real small pond fishing. That's where you make a hit list and you go after them. We'll talk about each of these in some detail. Second is wide net fishing. You create an environment where whales rise up out of the water, knock all the minnows out of the way, and swim to you. Last is wide net fishing with lead generation rather than place strategy, in which whale bait is advertised and they come to you. Now, those really are the only three ways that you are going to get to whales. So let's talk about each one. So small pond fishing. So that's where you build, by some means, a direct hit list. That might have 50 people on it. It might have 500 people on it. It might have 5,000 people on them. But you have literally hand-picked them. You know they're a whale if you can get them. So if you're familiar with the David Ogilvy story, so how many in here, at least the name, David Ogilvy? Raise your hands. Very good, okay? So most of you probably know the story. So when Ogilvy started his own advertising agency, he made a list of his 100 dream accounts. And he made a great priority out of trying everything he knew how to do to bring himself to the attention of those 100 accounts. And over a period of time, I believe the number's 38, if my memory serves me correctly. The story's in the book Ogilvy on Advertising, if you're curious about the precise number. And so he knew exactly who he wanted to get. I'll tell you a very cool story about this, and I went back and dug up old notes so I would get it right, because this is old, and yet it is applicable today as it was when it occurred. So this guy comes to me. He lives in Minneapolis. So this guy comes, and he's in the leadership training business. And what he wants to get off the road. He doesn't want to run around the country anymore. He lives in Minneapolis, and his question is, how can I get whales in Minneapolis? His business, he sells to a company at the time. One CEO goes in training. 10 key executives go into a mastermind group and meet with him monthly, and there's company-wide training 4 times a year, and he sells it for $50,000. Okay, now this is a while ago, and he wants 5 of them in Minneapolis, and that's all he wants. Okay? So the strategy we arrived at was, first of all, go make a list. Come back to me with a list of 100 companies, 100 CEOs who you believe, you have reason to believe, you know by having researched them, that they are leadership-oriented people who will have an interest in this somehow, be especially susceptible to this somehow, and have the right size company and the right type of company and all of that. Okay? We then created three things. We created a book cover for Minneapolis's top business leaders and 21st century leadership. Understand, we created a book cover. We created a full-page newspaper ad for the book, which had the names of these 100 people in it as the people who were featured in the book. We didn't run the newspaper ad, you understand. We just created the newspaper ad. Okay? We went to, at the time, Walden's and Dalton's still had bookstores and malls. You may remember if you go back far enough. And Walden's and Dalton's had a fairly robust local author section, and they would pretty much take any local author's book on consignment. They wouldn't buy it, but they would let you as a local author put 12 copies in there, and if they sold, they'd take 12 more and so forth. So we got a letter from Walden's and Dalton's saying that they were looking forward to stocking and displaying this book. All right, so we now have three things. We have a book cover, we have a newspaper ad, and we have a letter from Walden's and Dalton's that says they're going to put the book in the store. That's what we got. Then we go to the top 100. He goes to them to book the interviews with them to put them in the book. That's the pitch. Here's a FedEx package with book cover, newspaper ad, letter from Walden's and Dalton's. I want to interview you for this book. I need 90 minutes of your time, etc. Right? 100 went out, 63 interviews were booked. 38 of those interviews led to follow-up meetings now to talk about what can you do in my company now that I've discovered that we're, compadres in this interest in leadership and you appear to be sane, et cetera, et cetera. And that led to 16 clients. All right, he wanted 5. All right. So that's hit list. That's what that is. It's also sneaky stuff, which I thought some of you would enjoy, but I mean, it's hit list. Okay? On 2 different occasions, I've gone into niche markets, sold a newsletter subscription, has the entry point in the market, but signed up the target list of whales as if they had subscribed. Because a lot of people subscribe to a lot of stuff, particularly whales, and they don't remember what they subscribe to. So if they get a welcome letter and an invoice marked paid and the first issue of this thing that says they subscribe to it, they think they subscribe to it. I don't know. And so we took the hit list and put them in as if they had paid and let them mature as customers. So that's hit list. Okay? Understand you could do the same thing with a newsletter about fine wines if you had a fine wine store in a community. You could figure out who the 50 people were in that community who fit your definition of a whale. They all have wine cellars. They all subscribe to Wine Aficionado magazine. They all live in a home worth more than $500,000. Whatever that whale criteria is, you could put them on the hit list and you could make them believe they had signed up for this really cool newsletter about fine wines that happened to promote your fine wine store and your fine wine events. You could play exactly the same game. Okay? Second, wide net fishing with place strategy. So I just sent Cobain a note, Anito Cobain, to remind him of this. So again, this is an old story, but it is as applicable today, which is why I just sent a reminder note to Nito. So there's a speaker by the name of Chris Haggerty. This probably goes 15 years ago, management guy. And so Chris buys some time, and we're sitting at lunch in a resort in Phoenix. I can't remember which one. And he's United, I think United Airlines magazine, it's either United or Continental, had done, for real, a 4-page story on him. So the reporter, the journalist, the freelance writer, whoever, had come to one of his seminars, they'd hung out backstage with him, they'd gone to his office, they were just fascinated with what he was doing for reasons that were a mystery to me, but they were. And so they had done this 4-page article, pictures, favorable article, picture of his book, et cetera, et cetera. All right? And as he said to me at lunch, when it hit, which was a year ago, it booked me for the next 8 months. I didn't have to do anything. All of a sudden, what we would now call whales are calling the office one right after the other, and we want you to come speak. How much? He quotes a fee. They say, great. That's what happened. He says, but it's been 10 months, and that's stopping. What do I do now? I said, well, you could just pay and run the article again. Just because you got it free once doesn't mean you couldn't pay and put it in there again. And if they insist, they're going to put paid advertisement across the top of it in tiny little letters, but who cares? Right place, right message, let's just repeat it, right? Which is what he did twice, 1 year after the other. Paid the writer, bought the ad space from the magazine, ran the same article. This month's Delta Airlines magazine has a 4-page article about High Point University, and if you look closely, it says paid advertisement at the top. So he has already done it. Probably didn't get an article, and so put the article in there that he wanted. But what he needs to now remember is if it works, if it gets response, it will stop and run it again, because people will have forgotten it and parade of moving interest and so forth. In trade shows, consumer shows, if you're a consumer marketer, some people call all of them trade shows, but they're not. Trade show is an industry show, a consumer show is a show like at the mall, home show, that kind of thing. These are very effective places to be, but often most people do a horrible job once they are there and then blame the show. So the correct show strategy, you need a pre-show strategy, you need an at-show strategy, you need a post-show strategy, but that can be a terrific place for a whale to find you. And the important thing to know about whales is they are often in environments where they don't belong necessarily, but it's the only ocean they found. And whale hunting is about, it's okay if there's 5,000 minnows and only 2 whales, as long as we don't kill ourselves finding the whales. We're in a place where they can find us. The first year that we exhibited for a company I own, that Disc is here that does CDs in the exhibit hall. I used to be in that business eons ago, a lifetime ago, but cassettes, not discs, but producing for speakers. We produced product for probably, 2/3 of the speakers in the country, including Brian. And so we would go to the trade show, the National Speakers Association show, which there would be 900 minnows. Maybe good customers for somebody else, but not good customers for us. They were just getting started in speaking. They needed 50 units. They had no money. We're looking for an entirely different kind of guy. Okay? And the very first year they were there, a guy comes up to the booth. I wasn't in the booth. It was reported to me afterwards. And it was reported, we don't know what to do. So my 2 people in the booth said, we don't know what to do. Something just happened and we don't know what to do about it. I said, what just happened? This guy came up and he gave us this American Express card. And he said, write up an order for everything you sell. I'm going to go walk around the show and I'll be back in an hour to pick up my card. We don't know what to do. By the way, if you aren't watching them, a whole lot of people have staff that don't know how to take money. By the way, it's a very common problem. I said, do what he told you to do. Okay? Let's all put our heads together and think of everything we have, not just here, anywhere. Right? Right? and put it on a piece of paper and get the calculator. And when he comes back, which was, I don't know, it was $9,000 some odd dollars was what it was when he came back. His name was Dr. Peter Fernandez, a practice management guy in chiropractic industry. And he was a whale. He wound up being a great client. Terrific client for us, terrific client for me personally. I spoke for him at least 60 times at his events and made a whale of a lot of money. I don't know if I could have found him, and then if I could have got to him, and our conversation would have been very different than this conversation, because we put ourselves in a place where he could find us. So if you remember from the wealth book, there's 3 of the wealth magnets are this: be somebody, be somewhere, and do something so that a whale can find you. That's really place strategy. So I have some great place strategy examples for you. So my favorite, then I have some to show you, but my favorite is Sydney Barrows, who some of you know. There's a book she and I co-authored, all right? And in her former life, eons ago, for those of you that don't know, Sydney ran an escort service in New York, the highest priced at the time. There was a big news splash all over the New York Post and the news with the perp walk and the raincoat and all that. And she was called the Mayflower Madam. And one of the most interesting things about Sydney is, so many of you would not pay any attention to this, so I'm telling you all things you don't know. And every guy in the room, you nod. This is stuff you don't know. Okay? So most escort services at the time would advertise in the yellow pages. You find them in the phone book. And they would advertise in the cheap kind of tabloidy, weekly entertainment, free, pick it out of a rack newspaper. Right? And in New York City for many years, there was a really awful newspaper published by a guy by the name of Al Goldstein called Screw, which pretty much tells you the subject matter of this newspaper. And Goldstein was not very particular about advertising standards, so most of the escort service ads in Screw were pretty explicit about the kind of escort you were getting. And so, but Sydney's the only one who ever managed to advertise an escort service in the Financial Times. Right. New York, of course, has a lot of international traffic. They have the United Nations, they have Wall Street. People come from all over the world to come to New York to do business with Wall Street and to do business with the United Nations, and they all read the Financial Times on the airplane on the way over. And they are all pretty affluent, and most of them have different attitudes from the countries they're coming from about all this than the attitudes we have about it here. Her ad was allowed to say almost nothing, because after all, it was in the Financial Times, but it said enough. It brought clients who spent 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times the average of a client obtained through any other means. It is brilliant place strategy because it's a place no one else will go in your category of business. So my friend Matt Zagula's principle is show up like no one else, and one of my favorite principles is show up alone. Right? Be the only one who shows up in this place. So I told you about the jewelry store at the horse auctions. It's exactly the same principle. So here is, and I'm going to show you some other stuff later because I just did a bunch of work for a client in this industry. But this is a 2-page ad. So I'll show you this page first and this page second, which looks like this. This is for a very successful matchmaking company providing find a date, find a mate, find a wife services to very affluent guys. It's called Valenti International. Okay? $25,000 fee, sort of the starting point. The ad I've just shown you, where would you think you would find this ad? Airplane magazines, and yes, you would. Where else? Anybody, where else? Robb Report, maybe. Forbes, if they would take it, maybe. Wine Spectator, if they would take it? Yeah. Wine Spectator's maybe the best answer, the closest. So this ad is running in Hemmings Motor News, and in the DuPont Registry, which are magazines for collectors of high-priced classic cars. That's where this ad is running. Now, 90% of the ads are all car stuff. Okay? They're all related to ownership of collector cars. However, you want to think about who the consumer is reading that magazine, not what the magazine is about. We don't care what it's about. Who's reading it? 50-year and up affluent guys who buy classic cars. Not that women don't buy them, but it's like 80% guys. Okay? And some of them, if they'll drop $80,000 for a 1956 Plymouth, they might very well drop $25,000 for her, okay? Or at least a shot at her. Now, they are no longer alone, because in the same magazine is a less classy version of the same business. So this is model quality introductions. If you are ready to settle down with an 8, 9, or 10, we need to talk, etc. Stunning singles may join our registry for free. If you're a stunning female single, you join for free. And speaking of Forbes, so whoever said Forbes, this is Forbes, and this is an ad for Selective Search, another company in this industry, in Forbes magazine, which is read by affluent investors. So that's place strategy, let a whale find us, and let's try and be the only one there. Another whale hunting ad campaign you've probably seen or know about is the 4-minute-a-day, $14,000 home exercise machine. Okay? I am told by reliable sources this thing's real, it works. However, you have to be in good enough shape you don't need it before you use it for the first time, otherwise it kills you. That's what I've been told by reliable sources. So, however, this ad runs a lot, and it runs in lots and lots and lots of magazines. Now, the dumb person would run it only in fitness magazines. But this happens to be from the Robb Report, is where this particular ad is running. Okay? So these are place strategies. Let a whale find us. Our Gardner's Mattress friends who are here, who sell very expensive mattresses, one of the places they are advertising in, because they're a local brick and mortar, is, if you haven't heard this before, is in the Yellow Pages, but in chiropractic. Right? They're not chiropractors. It's called out-of-category advertising. Right now, they're the only ones there. So, person waking up every morning with a bad back, chronic condition, finally is looking at chiropractors in the Yellow Pages, which tells us almost without exception he or she is 55 and up, or they wouldn't be looking in the Yellow Pages. Okay? There's a very age demarcation to the use of that ad media right now. So he's 55 and up, which odds are he's more affluent than somebody 40 and below. He's got a chronic condition, a severe condition, and often he can't get a good night's sleep. And, I was about to go to a chiropractor, but maybe I could solve my problem with a really good mattress. And so they are showing up where no one else shows up.
Thank you for listening to the Magnetic Marketing Podcast with Dan Kennedy. If you love hearing in on these lost Dan Kennedy talks and speeches and calls, then please let someone else know about this podcast. That's how you can help it to grow. And the more it grows, the more free Dan Kennedy we can bring to you. Also, Dan would love to give you the most incredible free gift ever, designed to help you make maximum money in minimum time. Now, this free gift comes with almost $20,000 in pure money-making information for free, just for saying maybe. You can get this gift from Dan right now at nobsletter.com. Not only will you get the $20,000 gift, you're also going to get a subscription to 2 marketing newsletters that will be hand-delivered by the mailman to your mailbox each and every month. One from Dan Kennedy and one from me, Russell Brunson. To get this gift and your subscription, go to nobsletter.com right now.